Welcome to the January 15th meeting of the Murfreesboro City Council. Councilmember Eddie Smotherman has our prayer and our pledge.
Let us pray. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for our many blessings that you continuously give us. We pray that you'll be looking out for our police officers, our firefighters, and all of our city employees as they go about their business and conducting their jobs. Please be with those who are sick, those who are grieving, be with those who are mourning and hurt. Thank you again for our many blessings. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We'll move into our consent agenda. You have several items before you. Are there any questions?
Hearing no questions or comments, I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. You have two meetings of minutes in front of you, the January 8th, 2015 special meeting and the January 8th, 2015 regular meeting. Thank you, Ms. Machota, for preparing those.
Is there any additional?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14OZ56 to rezone an area located south of Indian Park Drive along Merchant Walk to residential multifamily 16 RM16 district.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Abstain.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
No. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14OZ57 to rezone an area at 728 West Thompson Lane to planned residential development, PRD district.
Move for passage.
Second.
A motion and a second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14OZ58 to rezone an area located at 315 West Main Street to Central Business District, CBD.
Move for passage.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14OA59 to annex an area located along Wright Court and adopt for same a plan of services.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright?
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14OZ60 to zone an area located along, located along Wright Court as Highway Commercial CH District and Gateway Design Overlay GDO 1 District. Apologize for that.
You're fine.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14061, amending the Murfreesboro City Code, Appendix A zoning, Section 2, Section 21, Section 26, and Chart 4, dealing with parking requirements for commercial centers.
Mayor, the staff would ask you to consider before passing on third and final the amendment that was placed on your desk and emailed to you earlier today.
Okay.
The amendment results from a member of the planning staff noting that There was an error in the dimensions on Chart 3 relative to parking, and so the requested amendment would be to change the title of the ordinance to include Chart 3 and to change on Chart 3 in one location the number 50 to the number 60, as shown in the cover letter and a copy of the revised ordinance that was attached.
Do we need to vote on the amendment?
Separately and first, yes, sir.
Okay, I move for passage of the amendment.
Second.
Okay, you have a motion for the amendment. Ms. Wright, in her second, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider the ordinance in front of you.
And I'll move for passage of the resolution or ordinance as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright?
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 14062, amending the Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning, sections 11, 14, and 15, charts 1 and 2, pertaining to uses permitted, lot and yard requirements, and land intensity ratios.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move to new business and consider renewal of a certificate of compliance for Stephen A. Tamburini at 1507 North Tennessee Boulevard.
Mayor, this is a certificate of compliance that's required for renewal every 2 years by the state of Tennessee for an existing business. We have found this application to be in order and recommend approval.
Move for approval.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 14OZ-R63, adopted by the City Council on December 11, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 2.27 acres along Warrior Drive from Highway Commercial CH District to Single Family Residential 15, RS15 District. Mr. Muhammad Farr, applicant, 2014-431. Notice of said public hearing was published in the December 29, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Blomley.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland. Good evening, members of council. Our first public hearing tonight has to do with two parcels located along the east side of Warrior Drive, just to the north of Riverdale High School. The property was zoned commercial highway several years ago when the city initiated its rezoning to commercial highway from RS15 during a larger rezoning of property along Warrior Drive. The current owner of the property does not seek to develop it as commercial, but rather would like to build two single-family residences on the subject property, which in total is about 2.27 acres. As sewer is not available to the property, he would like to build the two houses on septic tank. So it's actually a down zone from the existing commercial highway zone to the previous zoning classification of RS15. The property is encumbered by the floodplain, so the houses will have to be elevated to meet our floodplain management regulations. The subject property is directly across the street from large large RS15 lots that were developed in the county but annexed in within the last several years. The Cliffview Estates subdivision is across the street and to the south of those large county lots. Directly to the south of the subject property is the Riverdale High School, which is also zoned RS15. The property to the north and to the east is zoned commercial highway and was a part of that large-scale commercial highway rezoning from several years ago. The Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this matter on December 3rd and recommended approval of this rezoning from CH to RS15 unanimously at that meeting after the public hearing. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have before or after the public hearing. and I do not know if the applicant is present if you have any questions for him.
No questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Plumley. Before we open our public hearing, our rules for the public hearing is please come to the podium and state your name and your address. We ask you to speak no more than 3 minutes unless you're representing a group, and then you have 5 minutes. Please address all comments to the council, and when you do that, we'll make sure that we do our best to get your questions answered. Each person we ask will be allowed to speak once. And given the rules, we'll open the public hearing for this rezoning request. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14OZ63 to rezone an area located along Warrior Drive to single-family residential 15 RS15 district.
Move for passage on first reading.
Second. A motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 14OZ-R64 adopted by the City Council on December 11, 2014, will conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 7.12 acres located along Bridge Avenue from residential multifamily 16 RM16 district to highway commercial CH district. Mr. Stan Norton, applicant, 2014-436. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the December 29, 2014 issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our second public hearing tonight is property located along the south side of Bridge Avenue. It's currently zoned RM16 and had been used for agricultural purposes for a number of years. It is the only piece of property along the south side of Bridge Avenue, or along the along either side of Bridge Avenue, west of the West Fork of Stones River, that is not zoned commercial highway. It is zoned RM16. It's my understanding that the former property owner who used the property agriculturally has passed, and that the owners of the Tennessee Auto Auction and City Auto next door to the west have the property under contract, and if successful in rezoning the property to commercial highway, would like to extend their development incorporate this tract into their property, and a site plan will be forthcoming for them to extend their development onto the subject property. As I mentioned, property on both sides of Bridge Avenue is zoned commercial highway already. This is the last remaining parcel west of the Stones River that is not zoned commercial highway. And the property to the south across the West Fork of the Stones River is zoned heavy industrial. The property is encumbered by the 100-year floodplain of the Stones River, and any development will need to meet our floodplain management regulations. With that being said, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this matter on December the 3rd and recommended approval of the rezoning to commercial highway unanimously after the public hearing. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
How much of this property is in the floodplain?
I believe it's about the southern third to a half of the property.
Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. We'll now open the public hearing and consider this rezoning request. Anyone wishing to speak for or against? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14OZ64 to rezone an area located along Bridge Avenue to highway commercial CH district.
Move for passage on first reading.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 1408R65, adopted by the City Council on December 11th, 2014, will conduct a public hearing to consider annexing approximately 5.01 acres, approximately 3.04 acres of parcel, and approximately 1.97 acres of right-of-way along Salem Highway at Armstrong Valley Road, and consider proposed plan of services for the area. Mr. Severin Patel, applicant, 2014-507. Notice of said public hearing was published in the December 29, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Ballman.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our third public hearing tonight is for the annexation of property that is at the southwest corner of the intersection of New Salem Highway and Armstrong Valley Road. There is currently a Shell station, convenience market / gas station on the property. The owner of the convenience market, the owner of the property, has petitioned the city for annexation of his property in order to benefit from city-provided services such as police protection, fire protection, not solid waste collection because it is a commercial development, and the potential to extend sewer to his property. Sewer is not technically currently available, but is only a short distance from the subject property, and the applicant would have an opportunity to extend sewer if he is annexed into the city limits. But with that being said, he has requested annexation into the city limits. The property is within the city's urban growth boundary, and it is contiguous with the existing city limits. As you noted, Mayor McFarland, we have included the right-of-way of New Salem Highway directly in front of the subject property. That's about 750 linear feet of New Salem Highway right-of-way. And this annexation actually fills in a little bit of a gap on the south side of New Salem Highway. We'll be able to effect this annexation. City services will be available upon the effective date of annexation. And, of course, we'll follow up with our annexation progress reports if the property is annexed. Planning Commission held a public hearing on this matter on December 3rd and voted unanimously to recommend approval of the annexation. If you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them before or after the public hearing.
Matthew, do you know if the property to the east, straight across Armstrong Valley Road, is that already in the city?
It is. That is the Weston Village and Weston Park development.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, any questions? All right. Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this rezoning, or excuse me, this annexation request, please come to the podium. Wake you up.
You scare me to death.
All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 140865 to annex an area located along Salem Highway at Armstrong Valley Road and adopt for same a plan of services.
Move for passage on first reading.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Shacklet. Ms. Wright?
Ms. Kels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 14OZ-R66, adopted by the City Council on December 11, 2014, will conduct a public hearing to consider removing approximately 10.04 acres from the Planned Residential Development PRD District at Baskinwood, located along Joe B. Jackson Parkway, and rezone it as a residential multifamily RM16 district. Mr. Jimmy Allen, applicant, 2014-R35. Notice of said public hearing was published in the December 29th issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our final public hearing tonight is with regards to the Villas at Baskinwood planned residential development, which is located along the south side of Joe B. Jackson Parkway, directly adjacent to the new Walmart, which will be opening up in the next several months. The Villas at Baskinwood, I believe, was approved back in 2005. It's a townhome development. Units are individually owned. Approximately a quarter of the villas at Baskinwood was actually developed, and the development, as with several of developments around town, was a casualty of the recession, and the property owner is attempting to salvage what can be salvaged with this development. As such, he has requested to amend the planned residential development to reduce the number of units from 158 townhome condominium units to 62 units. And so the front portion of the development would remain the same as a part of the Villas at Baskinwood PRD. The rear portion of the PRD he is requesting to rezone to RM16, which is multifamily residential with a maximum density of 16 dwelling units per acre. And you can see on the map in front of you that there would be an appendage along the east side of the tract going up to Joe B. Jackson Parkway. This would be the shared access for the villas at Baskinwood, the existing development, as well as the rear portion of the property, which would be zoned RM16 and would be a separate development. This would be a 50-foot wide strip. In order to incorporate this amendment, there are a number of bullet-pointed changes that Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC, who is representing the applicant, has included in the agenda materials. And I believe he would like to present those changes prior to the public hearing. With that being said, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this matter on December 3rd and recommended approval unanimously. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And as I mentioned, Mr. Taylor would like to give a brief presentation as well.
Matthew, so this, when I was reading through this, I'm not sure if I got confused or not, but I see there's been a couple of notes, and you mentioned it, that you're talking about reducing the number of units from 158 to 62. But is that a net reduction, or is there's still 10 acres left that can still have 160 more put back on it, right?
That's correct. It would actually be a net increase if the southern 10 acres is developed to its maximum potential.
So why are we listing out, why do we keep saying, and why does it come up in this way that we're reducing, why is it a big bullet point here, we're reducing the number of units?
Well, it's reducing the number of units in the PRD because that front portion would stand alone. Overall, the number of units would not be reduced, but specifically as it pertains to the PRD, the villas at Baskinwood, the number of units will be reduced.
All right.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Balmy? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. I did want to go through the items briefly, just to go over the changes in the PRD itself, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards. As Mr. Blomley said, we are reducing the overall area of the PRD to really what you see built on the ground out there now. It was originally 16.4 acres, and we're reducing the actual PRD area to just over 6 acres. The original PRD allowed 158 townhouses. With this reduced area, obviously that will scale back to 62 acres in the PRD area itself. The original PRD had a side setback along the eastern boundary of a little bit over 50 feet. And with this, because we're creating a new property line internal, it would go down to approximately 10 feet on that eastern side. The building's not any closer to the homeowners on the east side. We're just creating a new property line for that access drive. The original PRD had a rear setback along the southern property line of just over 30 feet. This proposed property line would be within about 12 feet of the existing units or planned units. The original PRD had about 50 visitor parking spaces in addition to what was planned with each unit itself. Here we are cutting that back to 16, which is in line with the same ratios of units that we're eliminating. We are planning a sidewalk along the appendage, as Mr. Blomley said, that access road back out to County Farm. That sidewalk would be built with whatever is developed to the south in the RM16 area. The landscape buffer along the eastern property line was installed with Phase 2 of the development, and the RM16 developer would be responsible for that same buffer along that entire property line, and then would also be replacing any dead or missing material at the time that that piece is developed. Any detention areas that we have constructed out there that are disturbed with that access drive would be relocated, replaced, so that there is still no net increase on the stormwater side. The units along that shared access drive on the east would present to that street very similar to the way that the existing units present to the existing entrance into Baskinwood now. Then the RM16 piece is planned to have an entrance sign. We would have a 3-lane cross section at the intersection with Joe B. Jackson. And then the RM16 developer would be entirely responsible for constructing that eastern drive out to Joe B. Jackson. And as Mr. Blomley said, this development did get approved in 2005, so it really just started to get off the ground and gain some momentum just as the economy kind of went to pieces on us. And so it's one of the last remaining developments that has really not come back to life since the economy has picked back up, and the owner is trying to breathe some new life into it with these changes, give some more opportunity. It does not seem that the current plan is desirable right now. And myself or Mr. Harney are here that will be happy to answer any questions you might have.
How long is that access road, 50-foot strip? How determine how long that is?
It's about 400 feet, give or take.
Is that a private drive then?
It will be a private drive.
Okay.
And so it'll be maintained by the property owner at the back. And then we'd also grant an access easement to the existing units in Baskinwood so they could access that drive.
Any questions for Mr. Taylor? All right, thank you, Mr. Taylor. I will now conduct a public hearing on this PRD amendment. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. My name is Karina Anderson, and I reside apparently in PRD. And I have lived there for 6.5 miserable years. We're talking about landowners versus the citizens and the residents here in Murfreesboro that try to live. In these 6.5 years, that developer did not live up to his expectations. We've had constant blasting. We call this villas of blasting wood. We've had blasting in what will potentially be that PRD RM16 zone. We've had road construction where Joe B. Jackson Parkway is. They put up different electrical poles through the years. They put in sewer systems, water systems, constant construction there. Then this past year, we've had the Walmart put in PCD site. Again, major blasting. We had weeks of trees burning, soot, ashes all over. We've never been compensated for any of this. The quality of our life is terrible. If indeed you do pass that rezoning and make potentially apartments back there. This line I've measured is coming to my front door. We've already seen the wildlife leave. We've not been able to fly away like the birds or run away like the deer. We've had to stay put because it has been a bad economy. And we've had to stay there, whereas the developers go home to their nice houses and their free acres and nice vehicles, and we still have to live there day and night and see the mess that is caused and breathe the bad air, and nobody cares. If that is changed and you put in a roadway there, they're going to have more construction. For how long? When will we be able to recoup our investment in our home? We thought this was a home. And as a side note, whoever constructed those townhouses did a pitiful job. They've rattled our walls with the blasting, and we have no soundproofing, and they've not bothered to repave the roads that all of the construction trucks continue to come in and out of our property. The electric company, the water company use our development as their parking lot, as their lunch site. We get no respect. Landco, I believe, is the landscaping company, and they now have a trail back in that PD zone where they deposit. There's little piles of where the landscapers just dump their stuff at the end of the week. So I'm just here to say, on behalf of all of my neighbors, please do something right. If the owner of that property wants to sell, please make that a nice area rather than right up to our homes. If there's a way, instead of 10 acres, maybe 8 acres, just give us some space. Put up something, barrier, so we don't go through more blasting and constructions and the people. We've had no privacy, nothing. So that's all I have to say. But please consider the people, not just the construction people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14 OZ 66 to amend Baskinwood PRD located along Joe B. Jackson Parkway by removing 10.04 acres and rezoning same to residential multifamily 16 RM 16 district.
I've got a question.
Sure, Mr. Lance.
Maybe Matt or somebody can help me with this. What is the reason for...
Lance, which Matt
I'm
Taylor?
sorry,
or
Matt
Lyon?
Taylor, yeah.
Okay.
What's the reason for reducing the setbacks?
Really, the setbacks are on the east side. It's because we are moving that property line inside so we can actually create a legal lot back there. We've got to get out to Joe B. Jackson. In the rear there, the setbacks were just a matter of where we put the property line in reference to where the existing buildings are. The ones that are on the west side of the development, these they are in general, there's a couple units there that are about 12 feet off. The others are probably more like 50 to 60 feet off that property line. In addition to that, the RM16 would have, I believe it's a 30-foot front setback, so there'd be at least 40 feet between any buildings. And that is probably double what you see out there right now. If you go out there and look, the buildings face each other, and there are roughly There's about 30 feet from face to face, so not hardly double. And that's if you have a building right on the setback. So the distance between any of the existing buildings and anything inside the RM16 would be greater than what's planned out there right now. And we would have perimeter landscaping that would be required on the RM16 side as well. And depending on how tall the buildings are, there'd be additional setbacks on top of what is already required if they go over 2 stories.
Mr. Blomley, I have a question, please, sir. How long has Joe B. Jackson been on our major thoroughfare plan?
I might ask Mr. Richardson for his recollection of that. It's probably before I started working here, about 10 or 15 years.
So this road construction on Joe B. Jackson that fronts this property has been planned and cajoled and worked on for 15 years, and now we're finally getting it done, and it's pretty well complete. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's very close.
Okay. Mr. Taylor, the existing Baskinwood now, has there been units built on it recently?
I believe the last set of units that were constructed were probably in the 2008 time frame about. And that was 4 units inside of Phase 2, which is on the east side of the entrance drive. And they sit vacant and in a, I would say, dilapidated state because they were left that way for anybody to come in and do what they wanted to with.
And during that time, has the developer or other developers felt that there was an opportunity to continue that project, or was it an economic?
I believe
condition.
If I'm not mistaken, there were some financial hardships on the development partnership side, and it has went through a change in ownership since then of some kind. And they have not pursued it, and the same development group had the Liberty Village on Cherry Lane. Was a very similar, almost identical product up there, the townhomes. And I think that we brought through, or there was a change in the PRD there to go back to a single family zoning behind that. So in both instances, they have found that they need to change what they're offering at these projects.
So what they had in the past did not work.
Yes, sir.
And in order to move this project along to finish it out, they've come in there asking for this rezoning.
Yes, sir. And I think many of the things that Ms. Anderson mentioned, such as people misusing the property and misusing this property in the back specifically, would be addressed through development. They would become very manicured and well kept. Not sure that this developer or any other developer could keep the utility companies or construction workers from misusing the property, but by developing the property in the back, you would have people there more frequently. You would have a management group involved, somebody that's going to take some ownership of the property and start to maintain it like she would like.
So to continue and leave this like it is would just continue the failure?
All signs that we have seen, yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Taylor, would you give me a little heads up on blasting and explain to me who's in charge of that and how that works?
I would say that the blasting she is referring to during the Phase 2 construction, which is on the east side of the entrance drive, there was a need for material. It was a import or borrow site, and so at the rear of the property we knew there was abundant rock, as much of Rutherford County has, And so they went ahead and developed a mass grading plan and did some blasting back there during that time frame. To my knowledge, there's not been any blasting back there since, there's not been any active construction out there since around the 08 time frame.
So all the blasting that she's referring to would be the result of either the addition of the large big box and/or the construction of Joe B. Jackson,
Yes, sir, to my knowledge.
which are both finished at this point?
Yes.
Thank you.
And there would not be any more blasting.
I can't guarantee that. Yeah, you know, whenever we talk about Rutherford County, we don't talk about how many rocks, we talk about the rock. And so, as with any development that we've had with sewer and water, you will likely have blasting, but you know, hopefully with what's been done out there already, would not have as much blasting, because a lot of that has been pre-blasted, hopefully. So all of that will be dependent upon what any final design back there would be.
And when they do the blasting, if they do notify the neighbors within so many feet, and they take pictures and everything, and then after the construction is over, they do go, if a neighbor complains, they go back to the pictures they took previously. We take an engineer out there to assess the damages, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Before and after, right?
Yes, ma'am. I
That's the
believe it's
procedure,
anybody
correct?
within, it's either 250 or 300 feet
Right.
of that project. They have to set up seismographs.
Right.
They go do a pre-blast survey, just like you just described. And of course, all the blasters have to be licensed and insured through the state of Tennessee.
Right. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson, we've already held the public hearing. I apologize.
Or she want to speak again?
Any other questions?
Mayor, in order to improve a not so favorable situation with the deterioration of this project, change of ownership and terrible economic conditions over the last year, plus a new surge in economic development with the Walmart and with the completion of Joe B. Jackson, I think this cleans the table for this project to move forward and be completed, which would enhance the living conditions of everyone out there. When the blasting's finished and the construction's done, she can have some peace. But to leave it sitting like it is probably just going to make it worse. And with that, I'll move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, we'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Abstain.
Mr. Shacklet.
Abstain.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Let me say something. I don't mean for the public to think that those of us up here are so insensitive to what Ms. Anderson was talking about. With me being in the utility industry and with a variety of projects and these road projects and Laverne and Smyrna and all that kind of good stuff in Rutherford County, that's one of the downsides of development is you have to do so much blasting. It's all state regulated. There's a complaint process that you can go through, but it's very, very difficult. So I want her to understand that those of us that understand how growth and development and construction goes, there are some collateral issues that come with it. And it affects some, but there's a whole lot of conveniences that it provides for a whole lot of other people. It just happens that some people are adversely affected for a short period of time. but it's all a part of the bigger picture. And I hope she understands where I'm coming from, because we have empathy for your issues, because we, in my industry, we used to blast. We don't anymore, because we drill them now instead of blasting the holes out. So, I used to run across some of that, the complaints and whatever. But at that time, that was the only way to get things done. Most of the time, that was done with no houses there. Well, but, you got other houses not far away. So I want you to know that we're empathetic to what you've been through. I think this project is one that will clean all of that up. And I'm looking forward to seeing what all that looks like and how it works together with the older parts of Anel Drive and everything that goes out at Kind of Farm Road, and whatever happens out there, which we don't know anything about. But for instance, Stevenson's Drive, when it was developed in Stevenson, it was designed a certain way because they knew, the developer, that Joby Jackson would be coming right through it. So, I feel for you, really, and I hope everything works out.
Go ahead, Eddie.
And kind of following on what Ron's comments are, I guess we look at a situation, and as the city grows and people come to town and they're looking for homes, and we have to have growth, and we have to prepare for those people who are coming, because they are coming. Once a development falls into a state that this one did, certainly if it's not improved, it will probably continue down a road towards urban blight. And when you're talking about projects that aren't finished and stuff like that, you have to start somewhere to try and improve the situation. And I think that hopefully this is the turning point at which things start to improve. We're always aware and conscious of, as from a planning commission standpoint, of what the effects it'll have on the community, whether it's the construction phase or even beyond that, when you have issues with drainage and water flow. And we try and trust the engineers that they know what they're talking about when they explain to us retention ponds and detention ponds and all the things that they do to try and maintain the quality of life for people who live around a project like this. When you're in an area that's growing and changing like this one is, there is inevitably going to be growing pains. And Ms. Anderson, I think you've suffered those, and I can tell by your passion and your concern for your community that you want it to be a good one. And our concern is the same. We want it to get better, and certainly if you have problems in the future where you feel that things are happening that you're not comfortable with, I encourage you to stay in touch with us. Don't just come here and complain one time or explain to us your situation and go away. Keep coming back. We've got a public comments part of our meeting each month, and would love to hear back from you 6 months from now, and you let us know how things are going, because we want to follow up on it. And if it's worse, we want to know. If it's improving, that, like you said, the deer and the birds get the option of upping and going somewhere else, but we're sure moving a whole lot of deer and birds right now, but that's part of being a growing city. And we're working on the 2035 plan right now, trying to mitigate as much of those growth pains that will be there as possible. But we hear you, we care, and certainly don't just be a one-time visit to us. Come back.
And I'm sorry, you next.
Go ahead. That's fine.
And I was going to say to you also, Ms. Anderson, when things like this come up, we have a planning commission that you can voice your concerns before the planning commission, and they can also address your problems at the time. So that's another avenue you can take, because it goes to the planning commission. And I was checking the notes of the planning commission meetings, and on this particular project, and I may be incorrect, but I did not see any, comments from the public. So use that as an avenue to voice your concerns also before it comes to the council. Thank you.
And this process entails, we've had the first reading, or passed on the first reading tonight, so there'll be 2 other times that we'll have an opportunity. We'll find some more information out about if it needs to be addressed or there are something that can be addressed in those other 2 readings, then we'll have an opportunity to address those.
All good comments. Ms. Anderson, I think with all of us, and I know I've sat up here and gone through the planning commissions before being on city council for a long time, and I will tell you your comments that you gave were very heartfelt, and then after listening to that, I appreciate your passion and your comments, and I can tell you that I'm sorry that you're having to go through what you've gone through out there. I don't think that was the intent many years ago when the development was passed at the planning commission level that we ever would want something like this to happen, and I apologize that that you're having to go through it. We're going to do everything we can from a codes and zoning issue that if you see people who are dumping trash or those things, please don't let that, you just see it and not let us know. Please call us. We have ordinances to be able to handle those things. We even have ordinances for construction times and blasting. We just passed a new noise ordinance not too many months ago to help deal with those things. So please don't feel like that it's falling on deaf ears. That if you feel like that there's an issue, let us know, and we have great staff who absolutely will research and try to find ways to help. So thank you for coming. Okay, item 15, pursuant to Public Chapter 1101 of 1998, enacted by the General Assembly, conduct a public hearing to consider annexation progress reports for annexed areas effective for at least 1 year along Highway 231, North Lebanon Highway, south of Linford Drive, and west of South Church Street, 841 Osborne Lane, Memorial Boulevard, and Blanton Drive. And annexed areas effective for at least 6 months along Veterans Parkway, south of John Bragg Highway, Elam Road, New Salem Highway, and Veterans Parkway, Manchester Highway, New Salem Highway, and South Church Street. Notice of said public hearing was published in the December 29, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Public Chapter 1101 of 1998, enacted by the General Assembly, requires that 6 months after the effective date of an annexation and annually thereafter until services have been extended according to such plan, a municipality must publish in a newspaper of general circulation a progress report for the extension of those services and any changes proposed therein. The law further requires that the legislative body of the municipality hold a public hearing on such progress reports after the publication of the notice in the newspaper. The annexation ordinances for the areas I'm about to describe have been effective for at least 1 year. These areas include an annexation request in 2012-503, approximately 12.4 acres along Highway 231 North, Lebanon Highway. The effective date is March the 9th, 2013. And an annexation request approximately 1.02 acres south of Linford Drive and west of South Church Street. The effective date is June 15, 2013. An annexation request of approximately 1.81 acres at 841 Osborne Lane. The effective date is July 6, 2013. And an annexation of approximately 3.6 acres along Memorial Boulevard. The effective date is June 8, 2013. An annexation request approximately 3.27 acres on Blanton Drive. Effective date was July 12, 2013. Now, the annexation ordinance for the areas I'm about to describe have been effective for at least 6 months, and these areas include an annexation request of approximately 27 acres along Veterans Parkway, and the effective date was October 26, 2013. An annexation request of approximately 272 acres south of John Bragg Highway, and the effective date was November 16, 2013. An annexation request of approximately 3.11 acres on Elam Road, the effective date was November 16, 2013. An annexation request of approximately 477.5 acres along New Salem Highway and Veterans Parkway.
The effective date was January 18th, 2014. An annexation request of approximately 306 acres along Manchester Highway. The effective date was February 15th, 2014. An annexation request of approximately 67.12 acres along New Salem Highway. The effective date was February 15th, 2014. And an annexation request of approximately 18.52 acres along South Church Street. The effective date was April 12th, 2014. The Planning Commission, or the Planning Staff, recommends the City Council conduct a public hearing to consider these progress reports and plan of services for these annexed areas. And attached in your agenda materials is a copy of each progress report and an illustration of each area. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. I just don't want to read it again.
Can you repeat that?
Could you read that again?
One more time.
All right, any questions? All right, we'll need to hold a public hearing for these annexation progress reports. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to or any comments, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And we'll need a motion to approve annexation progress reports for annexed areas effective for at least 1 year and those areas effective for at least 6 months.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Item 16 will consider recommendations of the Planning Commission to schedule public hearings to consider rezoning along Bradyville Pike at South Rutherford Boulevard, Commercial Highway and Commercial Fringe, North Boulevard, RM12, annexation zoning, RS10 along Bradyville Pike, and PUD amendment along Rucker Lane to front setbacks for the Mansion Estate area. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. During its regular meeting on October 1st, 2014, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on the following zoning application. Approximately 1.91 acres to be rezoned from RS10 to CH and approximately 1.57 acres to be rezoned from RS10 to CF along Bradyville Pike at South Rutherford Boulevard. Mr. David Waldron was the applicant. The original request was to go entirely to CH, and the CF and the CH was what the Planning Commission ended up approving. After that initial public hearing on October 1st, the Planning Commission discussed the matter and then deferred action. The item was placed back on the Planning Commission's agenda under old business on December 17th, at which time the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval. Also, during its regular meeting on January 7th, 2015, the Planning Commission conducted public hearings on the following matters, after which they took action to recommend approval. Rezoning application for approximately 26.29 acres along North Tennessee Boulevard to be rezoned from RS15 to RM12, Mr. N.O. Beasley applicant. Annexation petition for approximately 37.1 acres along Bradyville Pike, Mr. David Boyce applicant. Zoning application for approximately 37.1 acres to be rezoned, to be zoned RS10 simultaneous with annexation, Mr. David Boyce and Mr. Alan Presley applicants. And a PUD amendment application for approximately 46.1 acres located along Rucker Lane to the front setbacks of the Mansion Estates area. Mr. David Alcorn and Mr. Bob Parks are the applicants. It is recommended that the City Council schedule these matters for public hearings. And we do have a specific request from the representative of the first item, the request at the intersection of Bradyville Pike and South Rutherford Boulevard, Mr. David Waldron, applicant. Mr. Brick Murphy, Mr. Waldron's representative, has requested that that public hearing be set for March 5th, if it pleases the council.
You can do March 5th and then the rest of them.
Okay, so you Ms. McGinnon, were we requesting to do that one public hearing March 5th, and then when would you like to do the other public hearings?
I'd like to do the others on February 12th.
One motion?
Two motions. Well,
Okay. Move we set the public hearing for the first item and the date in March
5th.
5th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's get that.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Ms.
Ms. Wright?
Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider for approval of 926
Wait,
S.
wait.
I'm sorry?
We need to
The
vote on
other
the
one.
other public hearing.
The
Oh,
February
Mar-
12th ones.
Okay,
February
so we'll
12th.
now consider if we can have a motion for the March 5th.
No,
February the
February
12th.
12th.
I'll make a motion that February the 12th, we schedule public hearings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Now, we'll consider approval of 926 Esquire Court as an outside the city sewer customer with RS-15 zoning as their appropriate zoning classification for the property.
Yes, sir, Mayor McFarland. The property, as you mentioned, at 926 Esquire Court, the owners of this property were approved by the county's Board of Zoning Appeals to construct an accessory dwelling unit at the rear of their property for a family member. After being approved by the county's Board of Zoning Appeals, it was determined that the septic system could not handle the additional dwelling unit on the property. So in order to obtain city sewer, they made a request with the Planning Commission. They petitioned for annexation. However, the Planning Commission, after holding a public hearing at its January the 7th meeting, voted to recommend that the property be served as an outside the city sewer customer as opposed to annexing the property. And one of the main reasons is there is actually property in between the subject property and the existing city limits. So city services would have to leapfrog development that's in the county. So the Planning Commission felt it prudent to approve it as an outside the city sewer customer instead. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Mr. Smotherman, I concur. Do we need to have a public hearing?
No, this is just a,
Okay.
any questions?
There's no comments. I'll make a motion for passage.
Second.
Mr. LaLance, Mr. Shacklet, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, we'll consider recommendations of the Transportation Director regarding the agreement with Weiser Consultants for the design of the Lydell Street relocation from Northwest Broad Street to Barker Street. Mr. Richardson.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of the council. I have two items this evening for your consideration, both dealing with primarily the same issue, and that being the Lydell Street relocation and reconstruction between Northwest Broad Street and College Street. The first item of consideration is an amendment number 1 to an agreement between the city and Weiser Consultants for the design Lydell Street relocation between these 2 points. About a year ago, the City Council approved an agreement with Weiser Consultants to provide professional services associated with the design of this project. And during this same period, the Transportation Department staff were negotiating several design elements with TDOT to determine what would be included in TDOT's plan versus what would be included in the city's plans. So these were 2 projects that were kind of going on simultaneously. As such, some of the items were listed as additional services in Weiser's contracts, as we did not know at that point in time exactly what plan modifications would be required for the Broad Memorial Overpass project or under what project they would be implemented. Since these issues have now been resolved and some of the design services were in fact conducted by Weiser Consultants under the additional services provisions of the approved contract and scope of services, as a responsibility of the city. Some of these design elements that we're talking about included the redesign of the traffic signals. The Broad Memorial Project previously had traffic signal designs for the intersection where it was located at that point in time for Lydell and Broad Street. That was subsequently moved further southeast and had to be redesigned. There were many design modifications for utility relocations based on us moving the road. And also there were modifications required for the drainage changes in the area. And based on those modifications that were designed under our contract, TDOT has agreed to pick up the cost for the actual construction components of implementing those designs. The original contract that was approved with Weiser was in an amount of $183,401.75. The cost associated with the original contract was included in reimbursement resolution 14R08. Based on the expanded scope of Weiser's services and associated time involved, they have provided a revised scope of service and cost estimate and a not to exceed amount of $256,746.13. Funding is proposed under future bond sale or TML loan. With that explanation, I'm recommending approval of amendment number 1 to the agreement between the city and Weiser Consultants in amount not to exceed to $256,746.13. Be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Richardson, if this is approved tonight, how long will it be before this is ready to bid?
We're hoping to bid this thing this spring. We finished the preliminary design on it. We've been meeting regularly with utility companies, trying to figure out, with Murfreesboro Electric and Comcast, of course, we're going from overhead to everything underground. Who would be doing what? How do we get services back into the building? The next phase of it, based on some of those agreements, would be for the city to go acquire utility easements and so forth, and some additional right-of-way to implement the design. So if we get going this spring on it, we hope that this is a year-long project or possibly a little bit less, but we will move with all due haste because we are trying to coordinate the time frame of this with the Broad Memorial Project.
One more question. Looking into the future, what is the status from Barker up to Maple? Will that be put out for engineering studies and another process started just like this one is?
Well, I can give you a little bit of a preview. We've had conversations with the county in conjunction with their judicial building and parking garage that they're moving forward on. In fact, I met yesterday with the chairman of the PBA for the county, and we were talking about how to coordinate the future road design, which would be from Barker really all the way to Church Street, and how that we could do what we're doing in conjunction with what they're doing and making it match up. And we're trying to set up a meeting with the county mayor right now to get everybody on the same page with that and move that forward. So there is some urgency in this as we are trying to move the road project in step with the time frame established by the county in the construction of their project. We would hope to have something, some additional information back to council on this and any agreements that may come out of this within the next few weeks.
Very good. You want a motion?
Yes. Do we need a motion on just A?
Yes.
Well, yes.
Yeah, we'll need a motion on both.
Both. 2 motions, please. All right. So moved.
Second.
Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider for adoption Resolution 15R03, expressing official intent that certain expenditures to be incurred in connection with certain public works projects and related expenditures for the Lydell Street realignment being reimbursed from proceeds of notes, bonds, or other indebtedness to be issued or incurred by the City of Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Thank you. As previously noted, the Lydell Street relocation project began early last year. To date, the preliminary design has been completed, and in fact, the city has moved forward in purchasing 2 privately owned properties to provide a location for Lydell Street relocation project. And the funding for the individual project phases was provided via 2 separate reimbursement resolutions as noted in your agenda package. The design phase was in the amount of $185,000 and the right-of-way phase was in the amount of $823,000. As noted in the previous recommendation, the project cost now is being increased and the project design process has now progressed to a point where future project costs can be more accurately estimated. The construction phase of the project is also currently unfunded and it is likely that the project will be ready to bid for construction prior to the new capital improvement program budget being approved and the funds made available. As such, it's our desire to consolidate the overall project cost, including construction, under one new reimbursement resolution consisting of the following project budget elements. The first of those would be the design in the amount of $256,746. The second being the right-of-way phase in the amount of $1.2 million, and the construction phase being in the amount of $1.3 million. That gives you a little over $2.7 million, and rounding that up to $2.8 million would be the estimated project budget, and this will be included in the next capital improvement program budget to be funded by proceeds from a future TML loan or bond sales. And with that explanation, I would recommend adoption of Resolution 15-R-03.
Mr. Richardson did a phenomenal explanation, but the short story is this just allows us to be able to intend to pay ourselves back for spending cash on the front end.
That's right.
And certainly, if we get ready to go to construction prior to the capital improvement budget being fully approved, we don't want to have to sit there and wait on this process. We need to move forward to it to meet our time frames with the county's project as well as the Broad Memorial project, and this would give us the ability to do so.
I'll move for passage.
Second. You got no choice.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
I'm trying to understand what we're approving, but I'm sorry, I just have a question. Intent doesn't have a figure attached to it, so what are we really approving? Help me understand.
This will allow us, we're going to pay for this on the front end with funds that we have, and then this is basically saying that if we go on the back end and we're going to borrow or bond or for our CIP plan, we're going to borrow money, we're going to pay ourselves back for the cash that we've outlaid and do that.
That's right.
But do we do that in other projects?
Yeah, most road projects, we will spend money on the front end before it ever gets into our capital improvement plan. So what that does, say if Mr. Richardson comes and we will front load paying engineering on a project to help get that sped along.
But is it an open checkbook? I mean, okay. So expenditures.
Ms. McGann do better.
Help me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I maybe need to catch up.
Under Internal Revenue Service regulations, we need to adopt this intent to reimburse resolution in order to be able to spend money now that with cash on hand, that we intend to replenish our cash on hand with bonds or loans, like if we borrow from the TML loan fund. When we get the long-term debt money later, we can take some of it, the amounts that we have specified in this resolution, and put that amount of cash back in our cash pile. But we have to pass the resolution, and there are time limits that are associated with it. We can't spend the money, and intend to repay ourselves back unless we do a resolution. And if we do a resolution, we have to finish the project within a certain amount of time. So it's a before and after thing. So it's saying, if we never took out a loan or a bond, obviously we wouldn't repay ourselves. We'd have just put out the cash and we wouldn't, get it back from long-term debt. So it's saying we recognize this is a long-term capital type obligation of the kind you would normally do with a borrowing, but because we want to start on it now, we're going to simply announce our intent to reimburse our cash from a future borrowing. But there is a time limit on it, and there's a dollar limit. There's no more than the amount that's referenced in the resolution can be spent on this project and reimbursed from a future borrowing.
Okay.
Sorry, Bill. I didn't know you had a question about it. I apologize.
No, that's fine. No, it's my problem, and thanks for the
question.
thank you for the explanation, and with that explanation, I'll vote aye.
Rick probably had the same question. He just didn't want to ask it.
Well, I vote aye.
I'm not the whipping boy anymore.
You knew
Mr.
people would get used
Smotherman?
to it.
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Robert. Thank you, Dan. That's a good question.
I got to get my address around.
All right, Mr. Crumley.
Good evening. For over a year now, members of the Solid Waste Department, Planning Department, and I've been examining an interesting question that's come up about how the city collects solid waste in multifamily developments. For the last 10 years, the policy has been housed in your zoning code, and it says for every development larger than 15 units, they shall, leaves no discretion for your staff, be required to provide solid waste pickup for their properties themselves. As early in the records that I could find as 2009, the residents of Innsbrook Court came forward saying there's an equity problem here. We're paying full property taxes. Innsbrook is 64 townhomes, still in a single parcel owned by a corporation, but the individual townhomes are assessed the full property tax on their townhome units. In their minds, they in effect own these units, even though for tax purposes there's a single bill going to the larger parcel. In this particular area, their expense is about $12,000 a year for solid waste collection. Last summer, we had a second multifamily development, Stonebridge at Three Rivers, that came forward with exactly the same questions. We're paying full property taxes on our units through the homeowners association. They don't actually get a singular tax bill, but they're being assessed the full property taxes. And again, it was this equity question. Everyone else that's paying property taxes in the city has solid waste service provided for them as part of the general services of the city, and we're having to pay individually for our solid waste collection. Thanks to Joe and Reyes and the planning staff, Joe did the legwork going back and found that there were 29 developments that have gone through since your adoption of this zoning code that says any multifamily development larger than 15 units must provide for themselves. Of those 29, 19 of them were large enough that they chose either commercial dumpsters or compactors for the collection of their solid waste. Of the 10 remaining, 8 have private collection using roll-out carts similar to the roll-out carts that the city operates with. What we found that somehow there were 2 properties that went through the process and were approved by city council to have city solid waste collect their garbage through our normal means. And so you've got 2 over the last decade that we're collecting, 8 that are using roll-out carts for private service, and another 19 that are using either dumpsters or compactors, much larger. We felt like we needed to go and look at some of our peer group to see if there was wisdom among the 8 cities that we matched data with in the UT benchmarking study. And what we found was there is a huge diversity among those cities about their policies for how garbage is collected. We found in our peer group cities that every individual residence is on their own for garbage collection. We found communities that contracted for solid waste to be picked up, not only at their residences, but at their multifamily developments. We found communities doing it using enterprise funds, raising the dollars with user fees to support the services. We found communities like us that are still supporting those services with general tax dollars. Because the question of recycling has come up recently, we also did some research on that, and again found this amazing diversity of our 8 benchmark cities 2 offer no recycling. 2 offer drop-off convenience centers, just like we do. 2 are once a week curbside. 2 are twice a month curbside. Some of them pay for it with a user fee. Some of them pay for it through property taxes. Some of them use contractors to pick it up. Some of them use city crews to pick it up. Long story short, we found very little help in going and looking at our 8 benchmark communities to find an answer to this equity question. So we worked up 3 different options, and at this point in time, we're seeking council's guidance before we go to the point of drawing up a policy. We developed 3 options for your consideration on how we go from this point, solid waste collection and multifamily developments. Option 1 is to do nothing. The current policy, with 2 exceptions, has worked very well over the last decade. It still leaves that equity question open in terms of townhouse units that are being assessed full property taxes but not receiving that service. A second option would be to go to the opposite extreme and say the city will pick up everything. There we feel like we run into some efficiency problems. Today, solid waste is picking up 44,000 rollout containers every week. The sidearm loading units are very efficient, able to pick up between 600 and 1,000 cans a day, depending on the density of their routes. We are still operating 4 rear loaders. They are inefficient, they require people, they have a higher injury rate than the side loaders. We're trying to avoid rear loader collection where we can. If the choice was to go to a policy where the city is picking up all these developments, there are some of those that would require us to do that with a rear loader. In our research, we found that grandfathered in the 2004 decision of council, there are 37 apartment units in town that we are currently collecting with either rear loader or side loaders, but primarily with rear loaders. Option 3 is kind of a compromise between 1 and 2. We found the city of Memphis has a very good policy where multifamily developments actually apply to have the solid waste picked up by the city via their solid waste director in Memphis. They had established a number of criteria that we thought were very wise. The location of the neighborhood, did we have existing manpower and equipment that could handle the additional load? Were the streets of a load-bearing capacity? Were the radiuses in the turns adequate for our vehicles to be able to pick up the garbage without having to back up and make second passes through neighborhoods? All in all, they had about 8 criteria that we felt were solid, that deserved to be considered in this decision. If the solid waste director approves the neighborhood, we were suggesting a 90-day period. You have to reroute. You have to make sure the routing is efficient. We will have to purchase cans if our decision is to go that route. The one-time purchase of cans could run as high as $55,000. We did not find significant continuing operating costs. Our vehicles are already out in the city. The crews are there. We still have the capacity to pick up additional cans. So in conclusion, we're seeking guidance tonight on how you would like for us to proceed. We've got some recommendations for our internal process. Most of the decisions about how solid waste was picked up was in the subdivision siting and of the plans in the planning staff. We're recommending a little more involvement of the solid waste director in determining how we mechanically pick up that garbage. Our staff has done great jobs over the years in terms of making sure we're properly screened for collection containers, that we've got adequate turning radiuses. All of those things they've done a great job at, and we appear to be in very good shape. There are about 850 additional carts if all of these developments that potentially would be eligible would apply for and be granted service. There is nowhere close to that number of carts today, as most of these developments have not built out completely, either due to the recession or other factors. Today, we think there's probably maybe half that number that would immediately seek to have the city collect their solid waste. Be glad to try to answer any questions. We're again seeking guidance tonight on how to proceed.
Any questions for Mr. Crumley?
I'll start. Jim, what are there other services, talking about this equity issue, surely there are other situations in our city where our residents don't make or don't get the full benefit of everything that the city offers. And is that the case, then we would be looking at some sort of an equity situation with them, or is that something that we're required to do by law or not? Or are there other instances where there are places that are annexed, but they don't have fire protection or they don't have police protection? I mean, is that the case?
Not to our knowledge.
What about garbage pickup? Other neighborhoods, maybe out off Brinkley Road, that
if it's a city resident, we're going to pick up the solid waste. The only thing possible.
Some may argue that they've got to park closer to their house than others. I mean, as far as accessibility to parks or ball fields or something like that.
Yeah, but
the solid waste service is more like a utility than most of the services the cities offer. If you think about our police and fire service, once you're annexed, we respond. There's no lag in terms of service being delivered. Water and sewer is a little different in that Consolidated Utilities has a large part of the city, and most of the growth of our city is in Consolidated's district. We thought and could not come up with a service that we offer to some residents and not to all, with the exception of this policy. And again, this policy was really, I think, and I was not here 10 years ago, but I think at the time this policy was put in place 10 years ago, the drive for multifamily development was much stronger, and the cost potentially of picking up all of these multifamily developments began to be an issue.
That's right.
I think the thing that when we say multifamily, we're talking about more of townhomes, not necessarily apartment complexes. When I was on Planning Commission 10 years ago and we talked about this, part of the driving factor is we didn't feel like that we should be going and picking trash up in apartment complexes because our trucks were could not physically get through.
That's right.
So I think what happened is when you ended up grouping in my opinion, developments, for instance, like Innsbrook Crossing, where it is clearly an easy subdivision. It's really a subdivision, even though it's a multifamily development, that our garbage trucks can easily get in and out. And so what happened is you really threw everything out. And I think looking at this and reading through, option 3 is basically saying if you meet our street requirements, we can pick trash up with a side loader. Basically, if you're just like every other neighborhood, then we could go in and pick it up. But if you are a multifamily development that we don't have the turning radius, we have to go in and we have to back out, we can't service that with side loaders, then we can't physically pick up the trash.
Some of the other criteria, every unit would have to have a ground floor. Every unit would have to have a place to store their cart when it was not placed on the street for collection.
So, Mr. Crumley, really out of the criteria you have, there's going to be I don't want to say a minute because you have different people who will definitely get on the program, but it's not where every multifamily developer is going to be able to come in and say, come pick our trash up.
Of the 8 multifamily developments approved in the last decade, we know that some of those will not qualify under these criteria because of the street system that serves them. Of the 8, we think there's probably 6 that would qualify.
So you'd still wind up with about 2 or 3 that's going to say we're paying inequitable taxes.
You'd still wind up with developments that don't meet the standard we would have enforced on them had they not been in a multifamily district. If you looked at it as a single-family development, we would have insisted that the roads would have supported solid waste going in and efficiently collecting those containers.
Do we have any liability for the roads?
One of the things we've discussed, and we would recommend it in our policy back to council, is that any neighborhood that is coming through the process and agrees with us that we can collect those solid waste containers would sign a waiver of liability that our vehicles would not impact their road system negatively. Most of those communities have had a private hauler running similar equipment to ours for close to a decade and hadn't shown wear and tear on the roads. But we still feel it's a good protection for us to have that waiver of liability on any damage that would be caused to their roads. These are still private roads.
Mr. Cromley, have we taken into consideration, it seems like in my neighborhood over there that I'm seeing more and more people that are recycling their garbage. We know that there's an expected life, and it doesn't sound like it's very long into the future for our dump or landfill. Are we going to start providing a service that may simply go away in 8 or 10 years period?
Yeah, the city will be faced with an option probably within the next 10 years of continuing with city crews to pick up the solid waste. The solid waste issue won't go away. Or do you contract it out to a private entity for both collection and disposal? There are examples across the state of both of those. They're both relatively efficient. There's not huge differences that I can find yet in the cost of those. However, I think that's going to be a decision as we get closer to facing a landfill. The recycling question has been on the news here most recently. And again, cities across the state, particularly our peer group of cities, are all over the board, from no service at all to picking up the recycling at the curbside once a week.
About what percentage do you feel like of the peer cities have no service whatsoever?
There were 2 of the 8 cities that we benchmark with that have no service whatsoever in terms of recycling. There were 2 others that only offered drop-off collection convenience centers, just as we do. So half of the 8 were very minimalists in the recycling effort.
Mr. Smotherman, I think you, I have talked about trash a lot over the last month. It's not a fun issue that people like to talk about, but it's one as a council that we are going to have to address. And piggybacking on what you're saying, we had a meeting on recycling a week ago Monday, and a lot of turnout on that. But I think something that we need to do, and it needs to be done sooner than later. We can't control what the other 17 counties are bringing into the landfill, but to wait, if the expected life of the landfill is 10 years, and that may not account for growth that we have coming in, looking at our 2035 plan. What I would like to recommend, and I've shared this with staff, but I think this is a council decision, that we really need to charge staff that we need to start coming up with regarding solid waste. Everything's on the table, and try to come up with, before we start going through a CIP plan, what makes sense moving forward, and then decide from there as a community what we're going to do 10 years from now. So it's a stinky situation.
It's a stinky situation, but failing to plan is planning to fail, and we know that's coming. And for us to just meander down this road as if nothing's going to happen is pretty naive, and I think weak leadership. So
how the city chooses to pay for it's going to be a big question. Whether it's having to pay a tipping fee going into a landfill, which we've been blessed and have had not to do in over decades.
Will you share what that number is, Mr. Crumley?
Yeah, if we just look at our benchmark communities, for us to pay a tipping fee in the landfill, somewhere between $600,000 and $1.2 million a year. Recycling, very similar numbers for curbside efforts, somewhere between
$800,000 and $1 million a year.
And that number could change because a lot of that number is dictated by, distance to the nearest permitted landfill. And there may not be a landfill near Murfreesboro. So, that number, when you look at the other peer cities, gives us some guidance. I don't want to represent that, that's going to be the number because it could be, dramatically different if it has to go further away.
Whether it's recycling or landfill, when we come to you with an annual operating budget and say, oh, by the way, we've got to pick up $800,000 to $1 million for either recycling or for landfill, we're going to be very strained to do it on the revenue base that we have today.
And the mayor and I have had several conversations. We've been in conversation with Rutherford County. There's new technologies in the area of solid waste. Waste to energy is something you're starting to see across the country now, where the trash is actually burned in a clean fashion. That may be a new way of handling solid waste in the future as opposed to burying it. So there is a good amount of work that needs to be done. We've already talked to our 2035 consultant looking long term, but starting that conversation and not waiting on just 2035 is going to be important for us.
Sounds like a great topic of conversation for a retreat, that sort of thing. Sure. Are we integrating that into option 3 somehow, or are we just off the tangent?
We got on a tangent talking about trash.
I've wondered.
Okay.
Option 3 addresses the immediate concerns, but I think you're very wise to open up the doors and look at all the options when it comes to solid waste.
So there's a application fee that you've attached to that option 3?
We didn't feel like it ought to be completely painless for these neighborhoods to come to the solid waste director and then have him spend a fair amount of time evaluating their neighborhoods and evaluating the cost and how the city would collect that. So we did insert a fee there to cover a little bit of the administrative cost. By no means will that cover the cost of the effort to look at those neighborhoods.
Sorry.
You watching a football game over there?
No, I'm sorry. There's 8 of these total that we think are in 8 neighborhoods.
10.
10.
There are 10 potential. 2 of those are already being collected by the city, so 8 that might come forward today.
Ms. Scales-Harris.
My mind is not good, but some residents came and they called me and asked me to meet them, and I apologize where I went. I went out Salem Road and I made a left instead of making a right on St. Andrews. I made a left. Then I went down to the first entrance into that area. I apologize. My mind is, I just can't think of the place I went, but I know we went over a little, it was like a little bridge like.
Stone Bridge.
Thank you. When you get in your 60s, you'll understand. And the concern at one time was the weight of our solid waste trucks over that little area with that little bridge, take the weight once it's full. And I was all for that, but was there a problem with that?
Still a concern. However, there's an alternate way for our vehicles to get in and out of that neighborhood without having to cross that bridge.
Great. Fabulous. Because they took me, the neighbors took me out. Well, I met them out there. That was a little concern because I know, it was just a small bridge and I was just concerned with the weight of our trucks and being liable. But if we can go another way, maybe through the rear.
We have an alternate way in and out.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Any more questions? What's the will of the council?
Do we need a motion?
Well, we need to decide between
Do we need to talk about that, or do we need a motion to get that started, or what?
I think you need a motion.
We need
Option 3 seems pretty apparent to me. I'll be honest with you. I don't think the $100 is necessary or warranted. It's not. Either we're going to do this. We're talking about spending $55,000 on carts. An extra $600 or $800 isn't really going to make a difference. obviously there's been people who have been having meetings and going through a lot of work to get this to happen, and to ding him for $100, I don't know, it doesn't seem worth it to me if y'all are up for scratching that. Just my take on it is option 3 seems like it's a lot of thought, a lot of good points. So looks like good to me. But
I'd like to amend then your motion to take the 100 out.
Okay. Yeah.
Mr. McGinn, do we need a motion, or would you like us just to?
I think the motion would be to direct staff to come back to you to implement with the appropriate ordinances or resolutions to implement option 3. This was intended to be a policy choice from you, and just vote to give us direction on the policy choice, and then we'll come back with the implementing documents. And you can vote on it again.
So moved.
I second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. I want to say thank you, staff, for all the work you've put in. And also, I don't know if the council members know, but we do have a president in the audience tonight. President Jimmy Carter is here tonight, or James Carter with the Innsbrook Homeowners Association. So, President Carter, thank you for coming. All right, Mr. Crumley.
Mayor and council will recommending tonight that you employ Johnson & Bailey Architects to design, bid, and oversee a renovation of Bradley Academy. The folks at the Historical Association reported to us a couple of months ago that they were hearing water running down between the exterior and the interior walls. We've asked Raymond Hillis to go over and take a look at it. It was more than Raymond could determine. He invited Lyle Lynch from Johnson & Bailey to do a walkthrough of the building. Lyle did a terrific job in terms of detailing out what he thinks is about $188,000 of improvements and replacements to the building that need to be made. The building is coming up on its 100th birthday. 2017 will be the 100th anniversary of that building. And this is part of what we think we may want to do to get it ready for that birthday celebration in 2 years. Required would be a new roof. The existing roof is 20 years old. There are problems with the parapets on the roof. While we're up there, we would demolish some of the chimneys and things that are no longer functional on the building. The front door of the building is in bad need of replacement. It is a custom item, has a significant lead time for delivery. Lyle's recommendation also included cleaning, repairing, recaulking, tightening up the windows on the building so that the energy structure would be much better. We have 3 specific recommendations for you tonight. Approve for our staff to go after the minor items on the list that we feel like we can deal with internally. There are some electrical issues and some other things that our own folks are capable of doing. Employ Johnson & Bailey to prepare the specifications, the bidding process, and oversight for roof, windows, front door replacement, perhaps some other items. We'd ask that you authorize the city manager to immediately go and purchase the front door assembly. It is custom, it does have a significant lead time, and we need to get it started quickly in order for it to fit into the balance of the schedule. Funding for the project, most of it comes from program income and community development. Each year, the loans that have been made for either rehabilitation or purchase of homes, part of that gets repaid. It is a variable number. It changes from year to year based on repayment schedules and the ability of some of those folks to pay. However, for fiscal year 14, that number was $113,000. We'd recommend to you that return from the community development program be our primary source of funding for the renovations. If the scope goes beyond that $113,000, we would recommend either going to unforeseen or to the program income from community development for the 2015 fiscal year. Either one of those works, we believe, as the project probably will carry over close to, if not into the next fiscal year. Be glad to answer any questions. If you've got real technical questions, I may impose upon Lyle to answer questions about building integrity.
Jim, about the windows, did we look into, I know we want to keep the historical appearance and that the windows will have a lot to do with that, but if we got $20,000-ish put into the kind of the window area of this, do we know what it might cost just to get new windows that might still look like
we do not at this time, but that is one of the things as we get a little further into the project that we will ask Johnson & Bailey to do, is look at a full replacement window rather than a repair of the windows in place. Same is true for the front door assembly. There is no protection from the elements for the front door, and our fear is that having spent $15,000 to $20,000 on replacing the front door, a council 15 years from now will be asked to do it again. So whether some sort of awning protection from the weather for the front door, or perhaps even going to a different material than wood for the front door, are questions that we'll continue to investigate as we go into the project.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like the windows may be something that we might be able to do. I mean, just stripping paint and that sort of thing in-house. And I just, what I'm asking is, I hope that we will get that answer before we start doing the actual work on that and spending that $20,000 to, if we can replace all the windows for $25,000, maybe that, have brand new, very energy efficient windows might be a better option than spending $20 to replace them if everybody agreed with that,
We will do that.
Thanks.
Mr. Smithman.
Yeah. We all understand the historical significance of this building and why we want to save it. It does have some very restrictive things about this facility as far as parking and whatnot that are extremely challenging to purpose this building and use it for something constructive. Do you have any idea how many people visit the museum each year, or visit this home or school for historical significance?
I know those records exist, Councilman, but I don't have them, but I will get them for you.
I guess my point being is somehow with using taxpayer money as opposed to the way the Oakland Mansion is preserved with private sector money, there needs to be some justification of why we're preserving this building, not just for the historical significance, but why are we preserving it? What are we going to use it for? And I challenge you, I guess, to come up with the answer to that question, because it's hard for me to support preserving something unless there's an intended use for it. Because, I mean, preserving something for the sake of preserving it. I've got a garage full of things like that, and every now and then I wonder why. And that's kind of where I am on this building. Is I understand the historical significance, and we want to keep it, but we really have to come up with a purpose, even if it requires an addition on some property next to it, or acquisition on some close property so that it does have parking, so that we have a plan and a vision looking forward to say, this is what we want people to come to this building for. And then once they're there for that, then they can observe and partake in the historical significance of it as well. And so I think we've got to think beyond just what we're approving here and continue down this road to make sure that there is a purpose for the building.
I think that is an excellent topic as we prepare for the 100th birthday. The building has served well this first 100 years. How do you purpose it for the next 100?
No further comment. I'll move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll?
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider recommendations of the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. I've got 3 items for you this evening. The first is a senior citizen property tax freeze. This is a program currently in place for Rutherford County and I believe the town of Smyrna. What this program would do would be to freeze the amount of property taxes paid by a qualifying senior. The base year for this program would be 2015. The way the program would work would be the resident would need to be age 65 years or older, would need to be their primary residence. There are income requirements to it that are set by the state. In 2013, it was $40,210 for all persons on the deed for the residents. They would need to apply and qualify annually. And should the City Council increase property taxes in the future, they would pay no more than the rate they're paying in the base year of 2015. Now, while the city hadn't had a property tax increase in 16 years, should that happen in the future, that's when this program would engage. We've got a resolution in your packet, Resolution 15R02, that would implement the program. Mr. Ted Beatty is in the audience this evening and want to certainly thank him for being willing to administer this program for the city at no cost. So be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Rob, I think we've had a freeze on their taxes for the last 15 years. So I hope we can continue that for everybody. And I rest assured that as long as we have continued growth, that I think we should be able to do that. It'll certainly help some seniors who are on fixed incomes who aren't seeing increases annually. At least it'll help remove some of the fear if something were to happen and there were an increase, that it would protect those seniors in that situation. I think this is a great idea, and certainly I'll be supporting it.
You want a motion?
Make a motion that we accept it as presented.
Second.
I'm sorry, just one question before we vote on it. Is there a term on this arrangement with the county as far as no administration fee, or is it open-ended?
It's indefinite, but it's subject to the county determining that a fee is necessary. Should that happen, there's a 90-day cancellation by either party. So we obviously would expect to work with the county to discuss that, but it is at the county's option to impose a fee, but we'd have the ability to get out and do it ourselves if Ms. Wright thought her staff could do it less expensively than the fee.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Wright, we have a motion and a second.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Mr. Beatty, thank you very much for working with the city and what you do for all the residents of the county.
Okay, very good. Mayor, my next item on the agenda is a proposed council retreat. This is something I had talked to the council when we did our one-on-one sessions about this time last year. And really the idea would be to step back and have the council do a retreat where you could identify some strategic initiatives, set some goals, prioritize some projects. Obviously, in a growing community, there is much going on. The council, to my knowledge, hadn't done a retreat in this format in the past, so I think it really would be a great opportunity for you all to set some time aside and prioritize where we're going. Clearly, there is a lot going on. I keep a project list, and my list has 110 items on it, and that goes up and down depending on what week it is. And so the idea that we can set this time aside to plan, I think, would be time well invested. We're bringing to you a firm of management education group. The principal there is a woman by the name of Marnie Green. Ms. Green led a similar retreat for the leadership team in 2011, and she was outstanding. And one of the reasons why we're bringing her to you as a recommendation is she's got 25 years of public sector experience. She worked in cities and has consulted with cities such as Las Vegas and I think Honolulu. So she's an experienced facilitator in local government. What I really found very helpful with Ms. Green's approach is the amount of pre-work that she did. With the leadership team, she conducted telephone interviews. We corresponded with her via email where we identified strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and she would do likewise with you. She would spend time with you one-on-one, probably over the phone and email, and then she's going to synthesize all those ideas and to give you a report before you ever walked into the retreat, so that when you get to the retreat, you really can hit the ground running and be very productive with your time. The proposed dates for the retreat would be March 11th and 12th, and it would be a location here in the city. I hadn't selected one yet, but we have options such as the Water Treatment Plant Training Room, the Patterson Community Center, Barfield Crescent Park at the Wilderness Station. The cost for the retreat is $15,570 plus some travel expenses, and I would bring that recommendation to you.
Okay, any questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Harris.
Mr. Lyons, has Ms. Green, how many workshops has she conducted dealing with city councils?
Well, I'm not sure I've got a number for that. Ms. Scales-Harris, she's worked extensively in local governments. I talked to a city manager in Washington that's worked with Ms. Green for over 10 years.
Based on our objectives for our retreat, what are some of the objectives we have for the retreat?
Well, I think globally it would be to develop a strategic plan for the next several years. The details of that are going to come from you and the other members of City Council.
Does she have a resume that we can look at?
Yeah, I provided some summary information for you in the staff report.
Yeah, I was looking at, I have a concern about her experience, the outcome of her experience, how many city council type governmental retreats, workshops she's conducted, and also the $15,750, that's not including her airfare, hotel meals, parking, and incidental charges, which the incidental charges, I'm just wondering what are they. And then I look at resources that we have around here. We have a Middle Tennessee State University, we have Vanderbilt, MTAS, all within 100 miles of Murfreesboro. Have these things been considered? These other avenues. The seminar she did about 2 years ago, I think that was at the Wilderness Station. What results can we see as a council that she did that with the department heads that we can visibly see or see on paper that came out of that workshop? I just have some concerns. I have some concerns about. I don't know how the other council members feel.
Mr. Smotherman.
Yeah, I'll kind of go down the same road I think Madeline may be going as well, and that's, $15,570 was when I kind of had to tap the brakes a little bit on the idea, because that's about $2,000 per person here, and as far as council members, and that's quite a bit of taxpayer dollars to be spending on each one of us to go and spend 1 day and a half sitting around a room discussing issues that we can't really talk on the topics because of the sunshine law of what we really want to talk about. I know on many occasions there's a lot of times that we would like to talk about how do you feel about this before we get into a meeting and kind of fill each other out on something, but we're not allowed to do that because of the laws. And $2,000 to go sit around the water treatment plant, I do think we need some team building. I think that, if we could just get a few events where we could get us all together and not discuss council issues. And I know that sometimes at TML meetings we have the ability to do that. some of the events that we have to travel to and we wind up staying at. There is that team building that takes place, and I think we need to work together well. We need to communicate well, and we don't. But I don't think it's important that we're all on the same page. But I do think it's all important that we have a common goal of improving the quality of life for our citizens, and being conscious of every dollar that we spend of the taxpayers' money. This sounds like a good idea on the front side, but when I get around to the cost of it, that Oakland Riverdale play Friday night after next, I think it is, and for us to get together at a ball game and each one of us buy our own ticket, it just seems like that would be an opportunity for us to get together and help the team build a team and a cohesiveness of understanding each other more on a personal relationship, because we don't spend a whole lot of time together. But I think that cohesiveness would be beneficial to us, and it doesn't cost us anything. Or the taxpayers, it wouldn't cost them a dime. So I guess, there's so many subjects that, we have the ability to understand what direction we're trying to carry our city when we speak about the 2035 plan. I think those are the opportunities that we have that doesn't really cost us anything other than what we've spent on our 2035 study and implementation of the plan. But it seems like a good plan or a good idea, but when you look at the cost, I'm not sure that the gain will offset what it costs us. So I've got concerns with it.
And Mr. Smotherman, I certainly share and understand what you say about teamwork. That is absolutely essential for groups to be effective. But the way Ms. Green has this drawn up, and my suggestion to you is this isn't, while there may be a team building outcome that's secondary, the primary purpose of the retreat is to identify strategically what are the top handful of things that you want to be focused on. Where are our goals and where are we setting? The 2035 plan is going to talk about the next 20 years in growth capacity, utilities, public safety. But I think the idea with the retreat isn't so much the primary focus being team building, because while that's important, I think the primary focus is to say strategically, where do we want to be in the next couple years? Can we agree on some goals and some programs that we think are most important this evening? We talked about solid waste and recycling, some of the big decisions that are coming down the road at us there. That is really the primary focus.
Can I ask you a question too? Is it a situation where it'll be more where we can or cannot talk about things?
It'll be in the sunshine.
Yeah, so we'll be able to talk about it. Is that what you mean when you say that?
It's a public meeting. Anybody can come, but you won't have a structured agenda in the point of having to advertise topics in the same way, because historically at special meetings such as retreats, you don't act on anything, it's discussion. And so you have more flexibility in terms of what you talk about, to be able to spend a lot of time talking about, a couple of issues.
Was the output from the leadership retreat that she conducted, was that shared with the council?
Yeah, we had sent that to the council after the staff retreat had been
Can I
completed.
get a copy?
Part of that, the pre-work, when I remember speaking with her, she wanted to talk about, well, what are the organization's strengths? Where are there some areas for improvement or weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are potential threats to the city? She was able to take and synthesize what she heard from many of our staff members and give us a document to say, okay, now let's focus on, what do we do with that? Likewise, she would perhaps have the similar conversation with each of the council members. What are, the strengths of the city and what are the opportunities facing us? What potentially could be threats? And to take that and have a conversation to say, now how do we deal with all those things at a strategic level is really what I think the focus would be. All coming from you all.
I was going to say, what is our total budget for the city of Murfreesboro?
$127 million.
Okay, so we're proposing, and also, Ms. McGannon, aren't there many jobs that have to have continuing education at all times?
Yes, your planning staff, your lawyers, your engineers, your accountants, all of us have to have it. I think some of the folks who have certifications in water and sewer also have to have recurring education, but I'm not quite as sure about that.
Well, the point I'm making is this is continuing education for the council. We'll have an opportunity to speak with her individually and collectively to let her know what our concerns are, our strengths and our weaknesses in a small group atmosphere, whereas the 2035 is a larger group atmosphere. And it's such a small percentage of the cost of our budget. You know, I don't want to spend any more money than I have to, but I think it's a reasonable fee. And there'll be no overnight travels for the city. There'll be no hotel bills for the city. I'm sure you'll cater in some ham sandwiches. So we'll keep those expenses low.
So maybe I'll throw this out there as an idea, and I don't know how difficult this is or what the number of people who offer these types of services really, what that looks like. But I mean, is it reasonable that we might, and I'm not sure I'll tell you the reason why, but is it reasonable that we might actually look at an option or two, just from a standpoint of, hey, look, this is what, I mean, we got somebody coming in from Arizona, it's $15,000 plus travel expenses. Are there some other options? 15,000, what'd I say?
50.
Sorry, 15,000 plus travel expenses. You know, is there an option where we could say, all right, look, here's what we get with her. This is, you know, what she's going to provide, and this is $15,000, versus if we just need somebody to come in and make sure we're sort of progressing along with the meeting like we need to be, that maybe we have someone that's from here in Tennessee. I don't, you know, maybe we get it done for less and it's a smaller piece. You know, the first thought that crossed through my mind was it sounded a little high. I don't know what people like that charge, so I don't know that I have any real reason to say that I know that's high, but it initially jumped off the page at me. One of the things that I want to mention to you, and I don't know how this shakes out, but this is a consideration for you guys to think about too, is whether or not we want the person who has already done the work with our staff or not. You know, does it outweigh, is it good that she has experience with our staff and our city, and she doesn't have to kind of get to re-know everything and everybody? Or is that not good because we'd rather have somebody come in that's completely fresh and doesn't already have some preconceived notions about what our direction of our staff may be, because that may be different from what we're trying to achieve. So, I mean, just some consideration there. I mean, me personally, if it's easy enough to get another option or two to show us, hey, look, or you may have already done that for all I know, you know, but maybe we could go down that road and look at it in a week or something, but I know we're losing time pretty fast as far as when we're trying to do it.
Ms. Kelsey-Harris.
And what I'm looking at too, and those are some good comments, I'm looking at the taxpayers' dollars. Now, I know she's been here before. She came about 2 years ago. And my question was, what positive results have we seen from her coming and having a retreat with all of our department heads? What positive results have we seen in the various departments? The only thing I have seen was they decided to form teams and come back to us periodically with what they are doing as a team. And only one time did I see a team come before us, and it's been about a year, and I haven't seen any more activity from that. So that's a question. What can I see that we got out of that as far as a city? But let's just talk about the council. I'm looking at the taxpayers' dollars. What we're talking about, 10 hours of workshop with approximately $1,700 an hour, what the lady's going to make, based on what we've said so far. So, and we're saying someone to come in and tell us where we're going to go and where we want, what we want to look at like 10 years from now. Well, to me, if we're going to go that route, instead of coming in and interviewing all of us, it would be more feasible and to me make more sense to get someone who's already familiar with our area and with our city. And like I said, within a 100-mile radius, I mean, we have so many resources. We have people, I've been in seminars on my various committees. The people have been great. And in fact, I happened to ask a person that did a seminar, and I said, what would you charge to come in? This is a top, in my opinion, person. And she told me $3,000. I mean, $1,500 for a day and a half. But the thing is, all the resources we have, MTSU, Vanderbilt, all the places around, MTAS in Knoxville that deal with things like this, and we're going to pay that kind of money. I mean, that just may be me.
And Madeline, I think that, this may be scratching an old sore for me and you, because we showed up at that meeting that we thought was a public meeting, and Ms. McGannon just said apparently the last meeting was a public meeting.
No, sir.
It wasn't?
The meetings of council are public. The meetings of staff are not.
Okay. But we showed up and were willing to listen to what Ms. Green had to say and some of her ideas to probably carry them back to the council. And we were basically told we couldn't stay at that retreat. We had to leave. And so I think that, that may be part of my issue with it is, we say it's going to be a small gathering, but if we have, 25 or 30 or 40 people that show up that say they want to attend and sit there and listen to what we say, they're certainly welcome to come in and listen. And if that's the case, then we just as well schedule a couple Thursday nights when we don't have business and come in here and discuss these issues amongst ourselves. And certainly there should be a facilitator that we could find that would come from one of hopefully our local university that could do very much the same thing as far as facilitating the meeting and hopefully accomplish the same goals without spending nearly the amount of taxpayer dollars we're talking.
I didn't think about that, and that's a point you made, but, taking anything, I'm just looking at taxpayers' dollars and what we want to get out of it, and I don't know.
I think we've got a couple things we need to figure out. I think all the council members had agreed that we wanted to do some kind of retreat.
Right.
We've not done one. Mr. Haley did one 7 or 8 years ago, but it wasn't necessarily a retreat. It was a project update.
That's right.
So I think as a council, we need to determine what we want to spend. But the thing that I would comment to say, when you're running, and I look at this as a business that's this size, there are certain things that are out of our scope of what we can and can't do. And it's not that we don't know, it's not that we can't do it, it's just that we don't know. And so when you had your staff retreat, I know in the meetings that I'm in, the dynamics of, if I'm in a meeting with staff, the dynamics change when that meeting. So I was even hoping that on this council retreat that maybe if we decide to do this or don't, that the half day that we have was not with staff, that it is as a council. Now, obviously, staff are residents of Murfreesboro, and if they want to come, I guess they could. It's an open meeting, so they could come. But I would think that if the city council asked that staff was not there for a half day, that we would not look very nicely on someone staff that would show up. So at the same time, I think it is good that we need to have something that is more of a council to get individual ideas on which direction we're going to go. So, I don't have a problem with this just because I think that the outcome that we'll see, we've not done one in 7 years. So when you divide it over a 7-year time frame, it's not that much money. And my guess is we won't do one for another 4 or 5 years after this. So the thing that I see, and if the council doesn't want to, I'm fine us figuring out what the other direction is. But we've got a lot of critical issues that are coming up over the next 2 years. And we make one mistake, it's going to cost us much more and going to cost the taxpayers much more than $15,000. So I think we just have to determine what the retreat's going to be worth to us and try to figure out how much we do want to spend on it. And I'm up for whatever the council wants to do on that.
If any, excuse me, Dad.
No.
Can I talk? Most of us have been through a strategic planning meeting in some organization, whether it be a nonprofit or a business or somewhere else in our careers. the idea of knowing, where you're going. What a facilitator in a strategic planning meeting does is almost like that of herding the thought, so that we don't chase rabbits and go down an alley that doesn't result in some type of action. That's what strategic planning should be, and it'll be totally ineffective if it doesn't lead us in the direction of some type of action. So, so it gives us a chance to take a breath and in a focused session, not deal with the particular immediacy of the issues that we've dealt with tonight, but to step back from how we function as a council and see what is the broader responsibilities, what is the broader direction that we see we want to go as a community, what are the areas that need our attention, and where do we focus our attention as to staff, our direction to staff, to start putting together all of that information for us to be able to move the city forward. So, I'm concerned that we spend a lot of money, but I've seen it. I would be more concerned about seeing the information that was derived from the workshop that was held with the department heads. Let us review that before we get to this workshop, so that we can have a broader perspective. At least it's going to be helpful for me to be brought up to speed what their perception is of the direction and the strategic planning that they're trying to do in their departments. Then let us, from our bearing in mind our responsibilities, to kind of coordinate all of that, to have a focused discussion on what are the priorities and where are those things we want to focus on. And while it does seem to be expensive or high, and there's certainly competent facilitators all around us, there's a lot of people that do this kind of work. To have someone that has some experience with this community, I'm not really concerned that dollar figure doesn't frighten me. Because if someone is going to do a good job, but quite honestly, I think and it sounds like the prep work that she's doing, interviews with us, it's more than a day and a half. She's going to have to spend more time on the phone with each of us to gather what we perceive. This is the conversation. And really, given the Sunshine Law, that's the only way for us to talk, is to share with that third-party person what our vision is, and then her to kind of congeal that into a meeting that actually bears some fruit for us. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I hope I haven't spoken all over the page with this, but my inclination is to move forward with this, because I think in the long term it could bear much fruit with the 2035 plan, and also help us as a group to sense what is the priorities of each other without having to do this, kind of haphazard as issues are presented to us. To do it in a deliberate and intentional fashion, to have an opportunity to step back from what's being done on the broader sense, and to set some priorities. I think it's a good thing, so I'll be supporting it.
My only problem, again, is she's been here before, had the same similar situation, and I personally don't see what has changed in the departments. And we're still looking at about $1,700 an hour. And, but maybe that's not for me to see. I mean, I don't know. I just think we could do, if we're looking at being the taxpayers' dollars, my dollars, I pay taxes, go for something like that I don't feel comfortable in seeing a result or anything. But that's just me. But the majority, just let the majority vote go, and I'll be okay with either way.
But we're in such a different situation than the staff was, in the sense that the staff could discuss things, and they broke up into subgroups and took on challenges of goals that they wanted to achieve, but they could discuss anything that they wanted to as far as just factual topics. With us, I mean, I'm sure we can talk about topics and goals that we want to achieve, but I don't know what prevents us from doing that anyways. I mean, I think we do that. Certainly we relay our messages back and forth through Rob on, I meet with Rob fairly regularly, and I can't meet with council members and discuss things, but I get a feel in my conversations with him where he feels that staff can support it or can't support it, and also I get a feel for, sometimes he says, well, let me go back and talk to other council members about it, and I'll kind of give you a feel for where you stand. And so I think that, we've already got that liaison between us that we can communicate through. I think for me, we go to TML meetings, and most of us go. I mean, some of us don't, but when we go to those meetings, we do get to discuss very much hard issues that are coming for every city. We're not unique in many ways. I mean, every city's trying to provide parks. Every city's trying to provide trash pickup, maybe. But the services that we continually see that we have these meetings at TML about, we look at those and we go, these are the goals for not just our city but all cities. And I think, for what we get, for what we pay, I mean, we hear phenomenal speakers at those meetings, and for a very minimal fee, generally the cost of a couple meals and a hotel stay that night, and a very small administrative fee that we paid to the TML for them organizing it. But and if you look at the makeup of our council, I mean, how many people can say that they've been on the council for, half of us sitting here just about have only been on the council a couple years or less. And so to plan for something 5 years down the road may be a little bit optimistic for election outcomes in the next year or so, but you hope that we're providing a service. You hope we're representing, but I still keep going back to unless there was a contract or a bid that went out that said we're looking for this service and what will you provide this service for. For us to just go pick this one lady out who did a good job one time, that doesn't seem like a very good way of conducting business. But
we'll be here all night, guys. Let's take a vote.
Mayor, let me make a suggestion. This is a retreat for the city council, and while I had an incredible experience with Miss Green, if you're interested in doing a retreat and you'd like to see some other options, I'm glad to identify some others. I'm not so hard set that it has to be Miss Green. I think there's value in having a retreat, but I'll be more than happy to get, see what I can find out about, some other folks and what that might look like.
I was going to make the same suggestion that we've talked about that we want to have a retreat, but I think the last thing that we need to do is to have for instance, a 5-2 vote or a 4-3 vote on who we're going to have to come to the retreat, and then the 3 people who vote against it come to the retreat, and I don't want to be here anyway. So.
Oh, no, I don't think it'd be like that, Mayor. I think whichever way the vote goes, we're going to come back together. We agree to disagree. Yeah. Once we vote,
let's table the vote.
Yeah, can we come up with a couple of different options?
I'll be glad to. I will say, though, that the March 11th and 12th dates probably will get away from us, but that's understood. I don't want to come back in a week or two and everybody's got that date circled. She stays. We've already lost one date with her. This one may get away from us, but we all understand that's going to be part of this decision. So I'll do some more work and be glad to come back to you.
Is this going to be a first, second, third reading, or is it just going to be a one-time thing?
One-time thing.
Yeah, Mr.
One and done.
I'm like, man, I think we beat this thing long enough. We need to go on and vote and do something. But Eddie made a point that I really, really understand. With some of you being on this council not very long, we really do need a retreat because each one of us know we have philosophical differences. We all have philosophical differences, And if any council that I've been on in the last 15, 16 years needs some kind of retreat, it's us. It's us. Now, how you going to get there? I have no clue. The money part, I called my boss today because, Milton Electric, we do them. They bring a guy in. After the first one, I didn't want to go to another one. But it was helpful. And these guys bring tools to the table because they've been all over the country that some folks are not going to have. The money's not an issue with me after talking to Chris.
Well, I'll clarify too. I mean, I think the retreat's a good idea. I mean, I think it's needed. So I agree with that. I just kind of was curious. I should have asked a more specific question instead of saying it the way I said it, which is, I mean, is this the appropriate amount in your view? Did you look at any other options, or do you just know inherently with you doing what you do every day that this is a reasonable amount of money for what the service she provides, and that she's better at this than an alternative solution?
Sure. If I didn't think it was reasonable, Mr. Lance, I wouldn't have brought it forward. There's probably going to be facilitators that'll be a good bit below her, and I suspect in looking around for experienced facilitators, there may be some that are a good bit above her. But again, the facilitation piece and the experience piece is unlike buying a police car. The police car is going to be a set vehicle that you know what you're going to get. When you get into your professional services, your architects, engineers, there's skill levels and expertise and approaches and personalities that work better in some places than some others. So it's not necessarily like pricing an object or a widget. When we get in the professional service area, it is a little bit different to compare.
I wasn't through before he cut me off.
I'm sorry.
But I like
I
like his idea about she's dealt with the staff, or whoever she dealt with. Well, she'll have a perspective from them. Now she can get a perspective from us. So that's a pretty good point. Because sometimes if you don't watch out, your department heads are going in one direction and you're going in another. Well, those department heads are the ones that set the expectations. Well, the other drivers, all we do is give them the gas. So, and that $15,000, I didn't know it was travel was on top of that. Because you was getting close to a figure that I couldn't live with. But once I talked to Chris, he made me very, very comfortable. He gave me real good teaching on those kind of things. Because I don't know what the guy comes in, does a good job for a day and a half, he leaves, he sends us back an assessment. And one thing, and I am through with it now, I want Rob to make sure that if you don't already have the data that I have on the 2035 plan, make sure that they get it. Whatever I have, they need to have.
Oh, absolutely. Already have.
Okay.
What's the will of the council?
Well, I thought we were going to send it back to the city
So you're going to
manager.
go back with
I'll be glad to bring it back.
Okay. All right, we're going to move to item C, position upgrade in the city manager's office.
Yes. This next request is I'm requesting that the assistant to the city manager vacancy be changed and that I be able to fill that position with an assistant city manager. In the profession of city management, there is a clear career path or ladder. Assistant to the city manager is typically an entry-level position into the field. An assistant city manager typically comes with a great bit more experience. And given all the work that is happening right now, all the major initiatives and projects, finding someone who's got experience in budget, capital planning, project management, supervision, I think really will be helpful. Certainly Ms. Logan did an outstanding job for us. She was excellent what she does. But I strongly believe that the depth of the field will be significantly deeper and larger if we advertise this as an assistant city manager. And with that, I'd recommend that I be allowed to recruit an assistant city manager.
Yes.
One real quick question, Rob. It appeared that Shannon was probably at the lower end of her pay scale when she was employed by the city. When you go searching for someone, do you think that they would start at the lower end of the scale, just like Ms. Logan did, and work their way up? Or are you trying to find somebody that's at the top of the scale that's got bang-up credentials?
Yeah, well, we're going to look to hire the best person for the job, but it'd probably be between the beginning of the range and maybe the 25th percentile. It's all going to depend on the experience, what that person's making. It's hard to answer that question, Mr. Smotherman, without having, gone out and recruited.
Most of the postings I see, when I get listed in the professional stuff, that's exactly the way it's listed. Depends on experience. Salary based on experience. Now, where that is and where that goes, I have no clue.
Yeah.
But it's not a set deal. And when you get to that point, it's based on experience. I had none as a district manager. I started at the bottom. But in 2 years, I got a real nice little bump.
I believe the extra experience, given everything that's happening, the pace that we're running at, will help us be able to be more nimble and quick. That's the reason for the request.
Do we have an assistant manager 1 and 2, or is it Jim, or is that a different position?
It would be the same title.
Same title,
Same title.
different position, okay.
And when we recruited for the position Jim now holds, as I remember, we had about 150 applicants, and we had people with a ton of experience. So we had a very deep field when we recruited last time, and we were able to bring in somebody with 30 years city management experience who's been a tremendous asset to the community.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And like you formed the committee for interviews and everything for the other job, I would like to see one of the council members be involved in the selection process.
We've used
in interviews.
Yeah, for instance, when we interview for planning director, I've got a community panel and a staff panel.
I will, Ms. Scales Harris, I completely respect your opinion. I will respectfully disagree with that, because I think you get into a level of micromanagement, and that's not what if that's the case, then we've got a lot of department heads that are going to be retiring over the next 2 years, which I think is going to be, that's one of the things I think we need to talk about at our retreat. But I'm not sure that collectively we could have a very agreeable, I don't want to say agreeable, it would be collectively tough to determine who's going to sit in on that interview process, and what one person may think is a good attribute, someone else may not. So that would be, the thing I could see is it being really tough for one council member to be put.
I'm not saying get involved, I'm just saying I'm not have a vote or anything, just sit in on the process, so we can kind of see the feel of, what we're dealing with, not having a vote or anything, just be involved in the process, because the person will be working, for us. So,
Now he'll be working for him.
Yeah.
But he works for us.
He works for us. So.
Right. And we work for the citizens.
Exactly. So, but in my opinion, in my experience with these kind of processes, we do not need to be involved.
And I understand the need to get, additional input. There's no requirement that, the department head positions, it's, the city manager's decision. There's been some incredible people who have come to work for the city lately. I won't name names, I'll leave somebody out, but you've seen some of the new people that have come into the organization, and they have been top flight, and we're awful proud because it's been a team effort. The planning director position, for instance, is one that is going to be very public, and that's why I've got people from the design community and city residents that are going to interview this person, and I won't be in the room, and I'm going to ask that group of individuals to give me their feedback. Likewise, there'll be a staff panel, because there's internal customers, and I want to hear from them about what they think. At the end of the day, I need to make that decision. And then you all need to hold me accountable for the people that I bring in. But I think we have brought some superstars in, and it's the gift that keeps on giving, because as we brought in these very talented individuals, they're training and mentoring the staff that work with them day in and day out, and that helps them get better. So, I understand. I like the input, but understanding the line is something I'm trying to share with you.
Hey, Rob, is it typical of a city our size that's growing? I think that's an important piece of this, too, that's growing at the rate that we're growing. Would it be typical to have that, and of course also one that has a city manager structure, to have a city manager and 2 assistant city managers? Yeah. Is that a fairly...
I had meant to look. There's communities smaller than us that have 3 assistant city managers. It all depends on the structure. I can promise you the workload's there to keep 3 people busy and then some.
Will this afford you the capability to delegate a little bit better or differently or whatever? I mean, it's obviously something you're asking for, so I mean, those are the kinds of things that we're going to benefit from this, right?
And in delegating it, the fact that they'd have that management and supervision experience and the budgeting experience in the capital project allows that to really take place. So, yes, sir, I think it will be helpful.
Yeah, in Austin, I met some people from cities, and they do, like Mr. Lyons said, have 2 and 3 assistants. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Lyons, no disrespect to you, if you want to do it that way, then I bow out of my request, and it's in your hands.
No,
I respect your decision.
Ms. Gales-Harris, and what I want to assure you is I know this is a very prominent and public position that you're going to work with and the other council members, and I want to make sure that we're going to pick the best person for the job and make everybody proud.
Oh, you've done an excellent job picking people.
Well, I'm about to make a motion, but before I make the motion, I've got one more comment now, but it'll be very brief. I hope you do half as good a job finding an assistant city manager as you did when you found Jim Cromley, because he is fantastic and he does a great job for our city. I make a motion that we approve the assistant.
Johnson City half our size.
Yeah.
Wow. And Johnson City runs them like water.
Before my motion was interrupted by that guy I just complimented. My motion is to approve the change to an assistant city manager rather than an assistant to the city manager.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, Mr. LaLance, seconded.
Ms. Gales-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider for adoption Resolution 15R04, establishing payments in lieu of taxes for the Murfreesboro Electric Department for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015. Ms. McGann.
Mayor and council, we do this each year as a matter of private act and general TVA policy. MED, which is not subject to paying taxes. It's part of the department of the city, but it can make and does make payments in lieu of taxes. This resolution sets forth the amount, and the amount for the upcoming year would be $3,120,100.30. I'm not sure, Ms. Wright can probably say whether they are in fact the largest taxpayer. They probably are 1 or 2. And so approving this allows them to give us money.
Move adoption of the resolution 15R04.
Second.
Ms. Wright.
Ms. Gales-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Boards and commissions, you've got a list of reappointments to the Evergreen Cemetery Board for you to review for the next meeting, and then the appointment to the Disciplinary or Review Board we're going to hold for right now. No action, just information. Ms. Wright, do you have any beer permits?
Are we going to reappoint the Evergreen? Or that we're going to do that next time?
We'll do that next time, yes, ma'am.
We don't have any beer permits tonight.
Okay. You have a list of statements on your desk?
Somewhere.
Move we pay the bills. Second.
Mr. Shacklet, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Other staff before City Council?
City schools.
Okay. Dr. Gilbert, thank you for coming.
Shortest speech I've ever made to you. Thank you so much for your ongoing support of our now more than 8,000 students. And here's Gary Anderson.
I don't know if y'all remember, I think that's shorter than Ken, no, that's not shorter than Ken Honeycutt's speech that time.
This one went down in history, Dr. Gilbert. Thank you, Mayor and City Council members. Come before you tonight to ask for your permission to allow us to apply for a loan with the state of Tennessee for energy efficiency schools. This is our fourth approach of going this way to get energy efficiency in our schools. We've had 2 previous loans and 1 grant before. We put together a team of experts in the field, and they're with us tonight. David Reese is with Energy Systems Group, and Lyle Lynch with Johnson & Bailey Architects, and we used NTech Engineering also, Mr. Ben Hunter, and our own staff. What this does is this program allows us to provide energy efficiency and better learning environments for our schools. This particular program is set up for 8 of our schools to get improvements. It is a loan, and we're not asking you to fund the loan. We will pay for it out of the savings from the energy efficiencies. It is anticipated to save $345,000 a year in reduced energy costs by using this whole program. And we've put together 12 different projects. The state will only loan us up to $2.5 million. The total projects we put together is about $4.4 million, a little bit underneath that. We don't know how much they'll approve. We don't know how much they'll let us get, so we have to ask your permission to apply for all of this. We will have to come back to you again when we find out how much they do approve. But what we're asking for, from you tonight is to allow us to make this application to the state for the loans. It's up to $7 million is all they have to offer at this time, and we want to get our fair share for the city. So I'll be glad to answer any questions about this. But again, this is just a proposal to ask for. We'll have to come back to you again after we find out how much they're willing, how many of these projects they're willing to let us do.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That was quick to have to sit through the whole meeting.
9:45.
Okay, any other, would like to make sure everyone knows the Martin Luther King breakfast is Saturday morning at 9 o'clock at the James Union Building, hosted by the NAACP. And then city offices will be closed, pardon? Yes, the Citizens Academy registration is going on, and then also city offices will be closed on Monday. All right. We'll stand adjourned.